Now, the other thing we discovered was that my grandfather, who I've never met my grandfather, he died when my dad was like a teenager. But my grandfather, when he married my grandmother and he found out that she had a daughter previous to their marriage, he did something that you also don't do at that time. He said, okay, why don't we bring her back? Why don't we bring her into our own family? I know she's been gone for a while, and she's not my daughter, but I would happily take her as my own daughter. You don't do this in a farming community in southwestern Ontario in the 40s. It's unheard of. And so my Grammy thought about it, but she said, you know what? She's been in this other home for 4 years. They're well off. They're well to do, so she's going to live a fine life there. Let's just leave her there. That story is really pivotal in my family's history because of my dad's story. So for my dad, he didn't really know his dad very long. I think my dad was 12 or 13 when his dad died. So for a lot of his life, he didn't have a dad to shape him, a dad to pass on stories of what it meant to be a man or a father. My dad just had to figure that out on his own. So you fast forward into the early 80s, and my family story involves, we have 4 kids in my family. I have 2 older sisters, and they have a different father. Their father was South Asian, married my mom. They had 2 girls, and there was a lot of domestic abuse in that relationship, and so my mom had to flee. So she left that marriage. She got a divorce, which is already a taboo thing in Christian communities in the 80s. And she has 2 biracial children in southwestern Ontario, which is not the most inclusive and accepting community. And so my dad meets my mom at a wedding. They date. On their second date, they get engaged. And they get married. And what does my dad do? He offers to adopt these 2 daughters who need a father. Even though his family, interesting enough, says, don't do it because they're mixed race, they're not your kids, it's going to taint our family. And my dad said, no. They are going to be my children. So imagine what that means for my dad when he figures out in his 60s that decision to adopt people who have 2 girls who have shame around their existence actually has this hidden resonance with what has happened in his own family. It could have changed a whole lot of the trajectory of my dad's life, but he didn't find out until his 60s. Because it is a lot easier for us to hide the stories of pain and shame in our own families and in our communities. And so today's passage is actually the opposite of that. Today's passage is about the story of David. But before you ever get to the story of David as the one who slays the giant, David who is the songwriter psalmist, you have to understand the history, the context of Israel. And so this psalm is about the psalmist saying, we will tell the dark stories of our past. We will tell them to our children. We will not hide those things. Our children need to know these things. So what is that story so far? What is the story we're at? Like, where are we at in the story so far? So we go all the way back to the beginning of this fall season. We looked at Genesis. We've seen this picture of God as creative. He creates a really good garden. He creates these wonderful relationships for us to have. Relationships with God, with each other, with creation, and with our own selves. And it's really good. And we've seen over and over again in the story how humans keep messing it up. They keep making mistakes, and yet God continues to be faithful. God continues to make creative consequences that allow relationship to go forward, to establish covenant with his people, to reveal like a new rescue plan for the entire creation, even when his partners in that are not always willing. So it's pretty bad. I mean, 2 weeks ago we had the book of Judges, which the question was, why would you even include this in the Bible? There's so much bad stuff in that. And that closing line of Judges is like my favorite closing line in almost all of Scripture. And they did what was right in their own eyes. Like, it's so bad. But then last week, Diana was talking to us about the story of Ruth, which in the context of Judges is like a breath of fresh air. Finally, we have a Jewish man who is observing the Torah. He actually is abiding by the law, and he takes care of a widowed mother and a widower's mother-in-law. Or widow's mother-in-law, sorry. He redeems them. They're crafted, they're woven into the fabric of the community again. And the story ends with Ruth having a child named Obed, who fathers a child named Jesse, who fathers David. So it's a really bad time for Israel, but at the end of that story, you get this hope. All right. David. And when people heard that name, they go, oh, we see where this is going. But there's other stuff that we need to look at to actually observe what the relationship with God has actually looked like through this whole period. Because we kind of like swept over Exodus and Joshua. So this psalm is going to set up the story for Israel. So if we can go to, it's going to be like our campfire story time, where all good scary stories happen, right? So, give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their children. We will tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might, and the wonders that he has done. Who here has seen Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings? Hands up really high. Man, I just saw it this week. It's so good. Do you imagine what his life would have been like if he'd actually known the true story of his family? I just love the line where it says I think it's the ant who says, you are the product of all the generations that have come before you. I think for me, I was really moved by that, and Kim was like, oh yeah, no, I've heard that one before. Yeah, sure. This telling is looking at what all those generations were like, what all the ancestors were like, both the good and the bad. So we can go to the next slide. He established a decree in Jacob, this is God, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and rise up and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and that they should not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. I'm curious, how many people here come from a family background where it is common to throw shade at your ancestors? No? How many people would say it's more common to honor your ancestors and only look at the good sides of their story? Hands up. So this is actually kind of radical, that they're actually putting down in song, this is actually a song that they're singing, all of the bad things that their ancestors have done. They don't want to hide it. They don't want to just give a really rosy picture. They actually want to say, no, like, our ancestors were stubborn. They did not relate well to this God who loved them. We are going to tell our children these stories. Not just the stories of great faithfulness on our behalf, but our stories of screwing it up. So that they actually get to know the God that they can put hope in. The next slide. The Ephraimites, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, but refused to walk according to His law. They forgot what He had done, and the miracles that He had shown them. In the sight of their ancestors, He worked marvels in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zoan. He divided the sea and let them pass through it, and made the water stand like a heap. In the daytime He led them with a cloud, and all night long with a fiery light. He split rocks open in the wilderness, and gave them drink abundantly as from the deep. He made streams come out of the rock, and caused waters to flow down like rivers. This is a really long psalm. It's like over 72 verses. And most of what happens after this is a retelling of the Exodus story. They go through all the different plagues that the Lord God brings upon Egypt as a way of confronting all of the different gods in Egypt that they have been oppressed by. God, the ultimate God, frees His people. And it's great. We've all seen the movie Prince of Egypt, or the Charlton Heston, The Ten Commandments. It's a great story. And you think it's such a great story that their lives should forever be changed by it. But basically this is, can we go back one slide? Yeah, this is verse 16. We're just getting into the Exodus story. And it goes all the way up until about 67. Just talking about everything that God has done, and their stubbornness, their brokenness, their sinfulness, how they've turned away from God. There's rebellion, there's faithlessness. They are worshiping other gods and idols. It's all actually a very, very tame summary of kind of Judges. There's genocide, there's death, there's rape, there's the trafficking of women, there's murder. This is just what they've become. And by the end of the psalm, this is how the psalmist wraps up. He rejected the tent of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim. Which, by the way, how sad it is. Like, we forget about this part. But God has made this covenant with the 12 tribes of Israel. And already one of them's like, we're done. We're out. Ephraim, the half tribe of Joseph. Nope. We don't want anything to do with this. So God rejects them. But He chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which He loves. He built His sanctuary like the high heavens, like the earth which He has founded forever. He chose His servant David, and took him from the sheepfolds. From tending the nursing ewes He brought him, to be the shepherd of His people Jacob, of Israel His inheritance. With upright heart He tended them, and guided them with skillful hand. We might know David for his exploits, like David and Goliath, dancing before the Lord, writing lots of psalms. But we need to know the context that he comes into the story in. It's not one where he is the natural selection as the one who should lead his people. He's a shepherd. He's the youngest son in the family. It would have made sense to have someone who's like a mighty warrior king to be their king, like Saul. Well, that happened, and it didn't really go too well. The fact that God chooses to still re-up relationship with Israel, despite the fact that they have walked away from Him, it's starting to actually create this trend, this characteristic of God, the one who doesn't give up, the one who actually is slow to anger and rich in love. And it's this God who says, all right, you guys want a king? I will give you a king, but he's not going to look like a king. He's going to look like a shepherd. Because rather than ruling, he's going to actually tend my sheep. He's going to, through Judah, take care of the rest of the tribes and bring them back into the fold. Because that is God's heart. Ever since the beginning, when God created Adam, and out of Adam created Eve, and they're together, the man and woman in the garden, ever since they went awry and had to leave the garden because of the rebellion, the hope had always been that there would be another one who would rise up and be that good human. The one human that we can all aspire to be like. And so, when Noah shows up, they think, oh, maybe Noah's the one. We're going to restart creation again. We'll flood it, start the whole thing all up again. He's been preserved by God. He's faithful. Maybe Noah's the one who's going to lead us. All right, afterwards, Noah gets drunk. Something crazy goes on with him and his son, and he curses his son. So, okay, maybe not Noah. But then they're like, well, maybe it's Abram. Maybe Abram is the one who can be that new human who lives well in the world. But, after the covenant, he trades his wife off, pretending that she's a sister so that he doesn't get hurt, and he sleeps with his concubine, and there's all this family drama. Now, God doesn't give up on him, but maybe Abram's not the one. Maybe Abraham will not be the new proto-human. Was it Moses? Well, he murdered someone, and there's issues after he gets the law that mean he can't go into the promised land because he's also a little bit stubborn. Oh, maybe it's David. That'd be my pick for David. I think that's a great choice. Great name. No, if we know more of David's story, yeah, he is a man after God's own heart. But he murders people. He sleeps with people. He becomes very power hungry. So it's interesting because at the end of this psalm, which is stirring up all the messy history, the hope at the end of the story is David. David is going to make everything right. And so it's kind of disappointing when he doesn't. And you would think that maybe they should just stop having faith that there's going to be someone who can come along. But this is woven into their being as people, the people of Israel. They have hope that there's going to be one who comes who's going to make everything right. And we might talk about that in the midst of the exile passages coming up. But our hope, we know, is in Jesus. Jesus is the one who actually shows up in the midst of this really messy story of Israel. And he has a very messy arrival as a child. But he is the hope at the end of that story of failures, of mistakes. He is the one that is the embodiment of God's hope. That God does not give up. God is still committed. God is still the one who is creative. He is our ultimate hope. And so the good news, I think, is that regardless of where our stories are at, what our stories contain, there's not one human story that is cut off from the hope of God. There's not one fatal mistake in your past that could cut you off from God's love. There's no generational sin or brokenness in your family that God can't deal with and say, I have an answer to that. I have a response to your pain. Would you like to meet my son Jesus? Because he is my embodiment of hope in your world. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to show a little video because I just think it'd be good for us to shake it up a little bit. So it's a little bit about David, and it's our friends from the Bible Project, but it actually does a really good job, better than I could do, of just summing up the story up to this point and where their hope is as people. So we'll watch this, and then I have some discussion questions for us.
The story of the Bible begins in a place where heaven and earth are united as one, the Garden of Eden.
And in that place, God installs His image, Adam and Eve, who will be God's royal priests and rule all creation on God's behalf. And this whole scenario is called God's blessing.
But they're led astray by a deceptive creature and are exiled from the heaven on earth place and lose their job as royal priests. And humanity spirals down into violence.
But God promises that a future descendant will come and defeat that deceiver by striking his head while also giving up his life, so that all the world can experience the blessing of Abraham.
This promise is passed on to Abraham and his family, from whom this royal priest will come. And this family grows and becomes a large people.
And so God invites all of Abraham's family to become a kingdom of priests. God will come and live among them in the tabernacle, and that's where Israel's priests will do their work.
But that priesthood gets off to a horrible start.
Yeah, and so when Israel eventually becomes a nation, their priesthood has become really corrupt. And so the people start asking for a king.
And eventually, God raises up David.
King David. And he's full of trust in Israel's God. In fact, with God's help, he defeats Israel's most powerful enemy.
All without proper weapons and without an army.
Now, not long after becoming king, David goes up into the high hills at the center of Israel's tribes, and he establishes a capital city, Jerusalem, otherwise known as Zion, or the city of David, and it's like a new Eden.
This is the same hilltop Abraham visited. It's where he met Melchizedek, and it's where God provided a substitute sacrifice for Abraham's failures.
Exactly. And so David brings the tabernacle up into the city so he can make this the place of God's royal presence.
And during the inauguration, David's dancing with excitement.
Not only that, he deliberately dresses like Israel's high priest. And once the tabernacle arrives, he offers a sacrifice and makes this huge feast for all of the people, and he blesses them.
King David is acting like a new kind of priest.
Yes, and God approves. In fact, in the next story, God promises that from David's line will come a king who will reign forever and build the ultimate new Eden, a temple for God's presence.
David talks about this descendant to come in a poem we call Psalm 110.
Yeah, David recalls God's promise that one of his descendants will rule at God's right hand. And he goes on to say that this future king will be a priest like Melchizedek.
And Melchizedek, he's a priest king that even Abraham honored. Melchizedek's priesthood is older than Israel's priesthood.
Exactly.
But why can't David be that royal priest?
Well, David was pretty amazing sometimes, but he also failed. He slept with the wife of one of his soldiers, and then, in order to hide the whole affair, he had that man killed.
That's horrible.
It is. And his failures actually continued, leading up to this key moment where Israel's enemies were threatening to attack. And sadly, David doesn't trust God to deliver him like he did in his early days.
Right, he counts all of his soldiers. He's trusting his own power instead of trusting God.
And so God's not happy. He brings severe consequences on Israel. And David responds by surrendering to God and by offering his life as a substitute sacrifice on behalf of the people.
That's like Moses, who offered himself for the sins of the people.
And it's like Isaac, who was offered up for Abraham's sins, but then God provided a substitute.
I see. So there is a pattern here.
Right, and it's this pattern that leads us to the story of Jesus. He claimed to be the promised royal priest that the story is pointing to. The one who will bring the blessings of Eden and restore humans to their lost calling to fulfill God's promises to Abraham and David. And it's his story that we will look at next.
If you haven't seen any of those Bible Project stories, I highly, highly recommend them. I think the Jesus one in that series has just been released recently. So, I wanted to show that because it does show a picture of the hope that they had in David, but then also the reality that he's still a human. He's still vulnerable to sin, to unfaithfulness. But I think it actually is really helpful for us to see those pictures of his faithfulness to God, but then the places where he actually chose to not be faithful. In the same way, I would say, I think it's helpful when we share our faith with the next generation who's in Sunday school right now, and we'll come back in a bit, or those who are new into the faith in Jesus. I think it's good for us to not just share stories of strong, good faith. All the miracles that happened in our lives. What it is that actually brought us into a relationship with Jesus. That's all good. But I wonder if it would actually help if we felt free to share the not great parts. The parts that we'd like to sweep under the rug when we chose to sin. When we chose to walk away from God. Maybe when our parents did something that actually did not bear witness to who God was. And the hard work we had to do to receive and open ourselves up to healing from God. It's kind of counterintuitive. We only want to tell the good parts of history. But I think actually we will grow a community of faith if we are willing to talk about the things that do cause pain. The things we're not proud of. But then ask the question, what was Jesus doing in response to those things? How did Jesus meet us in this sad, broken part of our story? So, I want us to actually talk about that. So I have 2 discussion questions. We'll just take 5 minutes. So in groups of 3 or 4, if you're on this side of the room, I'd love for you to talk about the first question. So why do you think God remains committed to humans despite all of our failures? So you guys get to talk about the character of God. And on this side, again, 3 or 4 people in a group, what kind of stories should we tell our children? Or, if you don't have kids, Nathan, the generation that's going to come after you. What kind of stories should we tell? Should we just tell stories of faith? Stories of sin? Both? I don't actually have a formula for this one, so I would love to hear what your response is to that. So let's take 5 minutes, and then hopefully we can hear back what people were talking about. I think one of the beautiful things about the faith that we are welcomed into is that it is a faith that is not afraid of the really hard things in life, the really painful and broken parts. In my studies of different world religions when I was in university, I found it's more typical for people to only say the really good parts of their story so that you can have the best presentation and you really do sweep things under the rug. But ours is a faith that is not afraid to say, here's the good and here's the bad and here's the ugly. And we have a God who, when things come out of the darkness into the light, it sets people free. I think that's really good. Amen.